Okay, so we have just found out that we can actually place components into our Grasshopper canvas. I'm just going to put it here now. So the way components work, and all of the components work the same way, you basically have inputs and something in the component will then calculate something or add something or do it some kind of magic, and then you basically have an output, right? It could be literally as stupid as having, addition, right? So you could just say, what is 2 plus 2? Or let's take 6, just so we have two different inputs. And I can just put those guys here. Those are sliders. I'm going to show that in a second. But what it gets out is then 8. So you just apply two variables and it will give you something as a result. And I could just change that any given time. And this has just been live updated, so you can just get a dynamic result from different variables that you can just basically change, right? So this is already kind of the basic logic of that. So algorithms are more or less kind of, you can always imagine them as recipes, right? If you want to make a cup of tea, for instance, you have different variables that go into the mix. So you have the tea that you're using, you have the temperature of the water, you have the volume of the water, and depending on how you more or less code those elements together, how you array them, will give you a different result, right? Maybe you have too much tea in your tea, and that's just going to make your tea maybe bitter, or you just add too much sugar. So you basically build up a chain of logic that in the end will give you a result, right? And this is exactly how Grasshopper works. You build up a chain of logic that is dependent from each other, goes in a linear fashion. It always goes in a linear fashion, more or less. You can't really do loops in the native Grasshopper language. And at the end, you derive a result. And those variables, those parameters, the nice thing in Grasshopper is that you can actually always change them. So that's the big benefit of Grasshopper. But again, like this component, the point, construct point, actually gives you x, y, z coordinates. So you can just apply any number, and I'm just going to delete this right now. So you can just press it and then delete it. It's going to be the same. And you can see in my Rhino canvas, I actually have a point now displayed. This is not a Rhino geometry. I can't interact with it yet. I would need to bake it before. Baking is a process where you take geometry from Grasshopper and you then internalize it in Rhino so it can be used there. But then obviously you can't edit it anymore in Grasshopper. Once it's baked, it's finally as a hard copy done in Rhino, which cannot be modified. In the normal basic setup, you can always do that, but in a normal sense, no. Now you have X, Y, and Z, and you can just apply different variables. Like, let's say, if you just double click and press any number, you get a slider. So you do not have to consider yourself what a slider is currently. So just double click and just press any number, like 7. And you can see now what will happen is if I scroll this down to 0, you can see that now the point is located at location 400, because as a default, those components are set to 0. And I will talk about those components, how they appear and what is a default value in a second. But just to make you understand what a component is, I can now also shift it in the Y direction more or less dynamically, right? And the same can be done. I can also take the same slider for Z, for instance, and for all of them. So it's kind of a cube movement here. So I have kind of this diagonal movement, right? So let's look at what happens. So I have inputs, 3 coordinates, and I get an output, which is my actual point, okay? So if I want to show you the inner living of this component, I would need to script it myself. And that's exactly what is hidden in those components. And I'm going to show it to you. And this is just something that I want to show to you. You do not have to copy that. I'm going to take the Python coding language. It doesn't really matter. You could also take C#. It's just different coding languages, right? And what I want to do is I want to zoom in and just click in on the plus. So I also have now my X, Y, and Z as inputs, okay? I want to double click into that. That will bring me into the Python script editor. And again, this is just showing you what is actually hidden in each of those components. It's just lines of code, right? So this line of code, for instance, a very simple one actually is in the Python component would be, so I have Rhino script syntax as RS, which is a shortcut for Rhino script syntax. And if I just press a point, I get all the different commands that I could actually use. And I want to use add point, right? And I'm going to just use a bracket, and as soon as you open up a bracket, you see all of the information that will help you to actually code this component. And in Rhino 6 it's very nice, they also give you examples, so I can see, hey, if I want to do a point, this is the language, or this is the way that I would need to supply it, right? So that means, in a nutshell, I need to supply a point using a list of variables, which I could use. And I want to supply a list of variables by just coding in, take the variable x, the y, and the z. And this is something that I will give you in a second. And I'm just gonna put my closing bracket there. And now I have just declared the command, it will work, but I have no output. So I have to declare that this output A should actually contain the result of this calculation. And that's pretty much it. I say okay, and this now also does the point there. So if I would take the same slider, just make a copy, and hook it up to my Python component, it will do the same thing. Okay, so this is what's hidden in each of those components, and they can be as complex as you can imagine, or they can be as simple as a line of code. Okay, in the end, you just supply inputs and you get an output. Okay, so that is a very basic understanding of those components. Okay, so the next thing is going to be that we want to do a circle on this point. Okay, so there we're going to now connect or script a first kind of logic that is dependent on each other. And I'm just going to double click and say circle. And we will, remember, we use this circle. Do not take this circle. I will come to this in a second. I put the circle here. And now I have two inputs. I have an input for the basic plane of the circle. So where's the location of the centroid, right? And I have the radius I can control. So maybe if I just hook up, and if I want to hook up a component to another, I need to kind of, if you see those dots here, I need to connect them. And you can see if something is successful if you see this arrow, right? And if you just connect it, you now have two components that are dependent on each other. So you can see now that the circle will always go to that direction as my point is kind of currently transforming to. And I could also hook up the slider to the radius and make it even more, let's say, kind of complex arrangement where as I move up, the circle also gets bigger, right? So kind of my first scripting logic that I've done there. So this is, in a nutshell, how Grasshopper works. Now we will look at some basic understandings and some basic knowledge about these components and kind of the connections that we need to understand, and then we can actually dive into the more elaborate course that I've designed for you where we actually design a tower using the logic of Grasshopper. So see you in the next one. Hi, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please feel free to leave a comment, a like, and most importantly, subscribe to this channel. Also note that this video is part of a 13-hour-long online tutorial series called Algorithmic Skyscraper Design. You can find it on my e-learning platform, Design Upgrade. That is courses.design-upgrade.com. To get access to all online courses, just sign up and secure yourself an all-access membership. Choose one of the many courses available with one new added course each month. In the Algorithmic Skyscraper Design, I will take you from zero to hero for practice-based visual scripting inside Rhino. Learn also to create advanced environmental simulations and design user interfaces with Grasshopper. So see you there and let us make some design upgrades.